Welcome to Paradigms at paradigms.life, the radio show and podcast that brings you inspiring people with visions of a viable future for life on Earth that includes humans. Hi, I'm Baruch, host of Paradigms. Welcome to the show. Glad you're here. Got a great guest for you in this episode. This guy is a musician, he's a poet, he's a teacher, he's a world traveler, and we're going to hear some of his ideas and some of his great music. And he's one of the folks who helped make the record Sharka, which we've already had a couple of episodes featuring. We're going to talk some more about that record too. So let's get right to it. Meet my guest on this episode of Paradigms. Haji Mike.
Yes.
Welcome to Paradigms.
Thank you. Thank you, Baruch. It's great to be here.
It's so funny the way this came about because first your bandmate, Bernard O'Neill, who'd been on the show years ago, contacted me about Sharka. And then Simon was like, hey, me too. And I thought, well, we got to have Haji Mike on, and Mouna will be next. So
yeah, it's our sneaky little marketing strategy.
You're a very interesting guy. I've been listening to a bunch of your music, and you make all kinds of music. I read one of your academic papers, just been sort of learning about you a little bit before we got together. And you've had a very interesting life. You're born in Cyprus, raised in the UK. And then all this work ultimately looks to me like it's about forms of personal and political liberation.
Yeah, it's a very important strand in my work. My musical output, or whether it's my academic work, I'm very interested in what human agency means, what people do. My background really is in a subject that I liked as a kid at school, sociology. And from there, I went on to eventually do a PhD at the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies in Birmingham, which is where cultural studies was founded. I've always been combining this academic and artistic world, because I think, even through some academic work that I've done that is very autoethnographic, I think that, it's important to learn from what you've experienced and learn from what you've lived. And while I'm into different sociological theories and different approaches, I've always believed that there's a lot going on when people interact. Somewhere along the way, I got much more into semiotics. Although I hadn't studied it, I've been doing it all my life because we all do it all the time, We're constantly interpreting meaning, and that enabled me to look at a lot of other things that were a lot more visual,
The human journey, there are features that are sort of consistent throughout people's lives. We grow up, we have certain sort of developmental things that happen to us, but we also each discover what is our inspiration. Hopefully we do. What is it that really turns on our aliveness and makes us realize we're here and actually be part of it and not just be on autopilot. I'm curious what your thoughts are. I mean, you're an observer of human nature. You're a creator and someone who receives what other people create. Right now, what's going on in the world, so many things. It's always so many things. But what's happening right now for us is what we're experiencing. So there's disease, there's war, there's all the terrible things. There's all the creativity and the beauty and the amazingness in people's lives. But what do you think about where we're headed?
In about 3 years' time, I retire from academia, which I'm quite looking forward to because I want to get more into full-time music and poetry and things that I've been doing for most of my life. But I've just got this dream of a utopia where all you're doing is creating, rather than thinking about the more sort of compartmentalized way of working, as in a routine sort of timetable and where you've got to go and do X amount of hours teaching, X amount of hours research, X amount of hours administration. In a way, I'm really glad that I'm retiring from all that because especially in my field in communications is always a field where every single semester you have to change your content, especially if you're teaching things that are more internet related, because the internet is a beast that always changes. You know, there's different apps, there's different platforms, there's different, you know. I remember sort of 15 years ago devising a course on podcasting, and people were saying to me, what's that? You know, what is it? You know, is it a radio show? I said, well, not really. You know, it's more people make it. It's not so much you're in an institution and you do a weekly sort of thing, and radio becoming increasingly playlisted, which is like a form of cultural fascism. I just like the idea of people making their own content, which is very empowering for students. So while I've witnessed all these tremendous changes since I started teaching 25 years ago, the thing that worries me most is the way this world is heading in this sort of, while I really like things like artificial intelligence, you know, I quite like it in DJing, you know, there's a lot of augmented things that we do, although I do love my vinyls too. But what worries me more is this whole concept of the metaverse and the way that someone's trying to sell you an idea that is 20 years old and they're recycling it. I would dread to have to teach something like that, because I think the way things are going, you know, we're tending to forget or if you like, underestimate the value of human interaction, physical interaction. And we've kind of got used to this in the last 2 years due to COVID, because we've been communicating like what we're doing now. I mean, oh, this is fantastic. You know, you're on the other side of the world. It's nighttime. I'm in Cyprus. It's morning, and we can have a conversation. So it's kind of like, it's got its benefits, all this technology, but I really fear for the direction it's going in, you know. The other thing that really disturbs me is that we can still live in a time where one country can just invade another. I've experienced that myself in Cyprus. I wasn't actually here in 74, I was in London, but most of my family were affected by it, as in becoming, you know, internally displaced refugees, which is to a lot of people a term that doesn't exist, but it is a fact. You know, you lose your home, but you're still in the same state. So you still can't go back to where you came from. So it's really disturbing that this can just happen just like that.
That's the first part of my conversation with Haji Mike. We're going to hear some of his music now, and then we'll be back with more of this conversation. From an album called Connection, Haji Mike and Kingdom Signal, this is Breathe. And you're listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.
Most of the time you're inhaling and you don't realize you're actually exhaling until you run out of breath and you have to inhale again. The most powerful thing is breath. When you wake up in the morning, celebrate life and celebrate breath. Thanks for the day. Give thanks for the food on your plate. And for those wonders in life. Breathe in. Breathe out. 2, 3, 4. Breathe in. 2, 3, 4. Breathe out.
Breathe. That's Haji Mike and Kingdom Signal from their record Connection. Okay, here's the next part of my conversation with Haji Mike. I mean, the first thing you were talking about, sort of the depersonalization that we're experiencing, it's very real, and it has massive effects in every society. We see it in this country. We see it showing up in lots of ways, lots of shootings and violence. But then the other piece, about the war, this is something we've been doing forever too. It's not new, and we keep doing it. And as you say, we're still in a time when one country can invade another, although we can watch. I can go to a website and watch the military planes doing their surveillance outside of Ukraine, right? Anyone can.
Yeah.
It's not hidden behind a wall. We can all see exactly what's going on. So here we are in this world that, on the one hand, it's the same big world, but it's very small because the information is traveling instantaneously. So we can see that this is happening. If all this technology existed, say, during World War II, would it have been different? How would it have affected? So how will the fact that we can watch this affect the way it goes? I have no idea. But what I wonder about with all of that, with the depersonalization, this ridiculous war stuff that we keep doing, and I don't take a side either. A war, it's always wrong, as far as I'm concerned. It's just always wrong. And yes, there are always reasons. There are always reasons for everything, but so what, in a way? But now the stakes are high because of nuclear bombs, and because we are so many now, that what happens anywhere can affect very large numbers of people.
And it will affect everywhere, really.
Yes. So to me, what I think about a lot with this is there an evolution in human consciousness? Are we moving in a direction, and are these remnants of a past we're outgrowing? It's a lovely thought. There's plenty of evidence that it may be true. Maybe there's evidence that it isn't. What do you think?
I think the thing that's always fascinated me about human beings as a sociologist is the irrationality. A lot of people seem to think that the world is very black and white, and there's this group of people on this political side, there's that group, and one group will get in power and they'll screw it up, and then the next group will get in and they'll screw it up, and the cycle goes on, and this is the definition of many countries in the world. Whether they're democracies or not, it's the same thing, because you can have a totalitarian state that will eventually eat itself, and then it's replaced with another form of totalitarianism, so kind of the cycle goes on. It's the irrationality of politicians and their lust for power. And this applies to all of them, though. It doesn't just apply to one. It applies to, it's like this performative moment that someone's got in a Zoom, with, I've been watching the Ukrainian president lately, and I just get this feeling he's still a performer, that he's turning it on, and it's very appealing what he's saying, but from a, emotionally, he's plucking the heartstrings of the West. But in terms of the pragmatism of what he's asking for, and in terms of what would be the next stage after that, it's crazy, and the invasion's crazy in the first place. But to keep the craziness going on, at the same time, you've got a foreign minister in the UK, totally inexperienced, who says crazy things like, we encourage mercenaries to go and fight in Ukraine. Did you encourage them in Afghanistan or Syria? Of course not. They were terrorists. So would the same law apply to some British person going to Ukraine to fight? When they return to England, would they be classified as a terrorist? Of course not. They'd be classified as a freedom fighter.
Unless the politics change.
Yeah, unless the politics change. And you see the racism that's occurring, which is the most frightening thing for me. Someone fleeing war is someone fleeing war. You shouldn't differentiate their skin color. African students trying to get out of Ukraine and being stopped at the border. Oh, you're African. You have to sit on the curb and wait for the next, I don't know what. I think that's disgusting. Everybody should be treated equally. The same goes for refugees. Syrian refugees weren't treated in this way, nor were people from Afghanistan and various other countries. And at the same time, Ukraine's being bombed, so is Somalia. Yemen,
Oh, no one's even talking about Palestine.
since Donald Trump came to power and since his demise, the same song carries on. I think Palestine's been totally relegated. It's just like, oh, right, well, that's still going on, is it? Palestinian people are the most downtrodden, oppressed. And I can relate to their story because we've experienced a very similar thing here in terms of occupation and in terms of division. Obviously, we haven't had the same levels of violence, we haven't had the same levels of conflict, and it is different in Cyprus, but we're kind of like 50 years behind Palestine, and the conflict between the two-state solution in Palestine-Israel is the sort of like solution, right? In Cyprus, that isn't the solution. The solution's been a federal state. But now we've got to a point where the solution is now being imposed as the two-state solution. This lust for power that politicians have and for controlling the minds of people. Why are you taking 18-year-olds and going and telling them to fight each other? They're all people. They've got a future and you're destroying their future.
We'll be back with more of my conversation with Haji Mike talking about power. But first, here's something from his album The Wild Heart. This is called The Wild.
All those things we don't know about. We live in the shadows, making narratives in time, captivating our minds, destruction and pity. Words can be wise, useful, constructive, reasoning. Words can also be hurtful, crazy, demeaning, compassion and understanding, expressions lacking feeling, actions from imbeciles of a bygone age become the norm. Gonna live in the wild, cause the city life is not for me. Gonna live in the wild, far away from the madness that was not meant to be. Gonna live in the wild, no bitter words. Gonna live in the wild, not seen, not heard. We live and die for the money, laugh and cry for the luxuries, aspire to be the stereotypes they feed us. They breed 1,000,001 ways to control your mind from all directions, and those who resist and question are objectified and sectioned into compartmentalized media frenzies for the sake of the lovers of putrid Beamers and Bentleys. To live and grow under all that pressure destroys and suppresses you, limiting your endless horizons. Gonna live in the wild, cause the city life is not for me. Gonna live in the wild, far away from the madness that was not meant to be. Gonna live in the wild, no bitter words. Gonna live in the wild, not seen, not heard. Some like the past to decide the present, strangle the future, control your every movement, expression, that vital ingredient in life, such a cherished thing you'd live and die for, like like a freedom fighter. When that bell tolls, they all know who stood tall, who stayed silent, and who obediently followed. The masses don't need indoctrination, they just need a good education. Gonna live in the wild, 'cause the city life is not for me. Gonna live in the wild, far away from the madness that was not meant to be. Gonna live in the wild, no bitter words. Gonna live in the wild, not seen, not heard.
That's The Wild by Haji Mike. Isn't that great? The wild is where we all come from. The wild is inside all of us. Okay, here's the next part of my conversation with Haji Mike. People say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I've also had it said to me that the more imminently corruptible are attracted to power, to that kind of power over. And I tend to think that's true. My work has been in psychology, so I've been also a student of human nature for a long time. And what I think is true, one thing I think is true, is that everyone has some level, some threshold of temptation at which point they will cross their own moral and ethical boundaries. Everyone does somewhere. For some people, it's a low bar. For some people, it's a very high bar. But so what happens is people end up being elevated to positions of power. Some of them start out as, and I'll use the language, sociopaths or psychopaths, but some of them don't. But being put in that position does, if you suddenly have all this power, it affects the mind. It affects your psychology. It affects how you think of yourself, what you believe you're entitled to, all of that stuff. So some of this is, we talk about nature and nurture, not nature versus nurture. Some of this is nurture, it's environment. It's what happens to people when they're exposed to certain conditions. Some stuff is hardwired, impossible to measure, but seems to be the case. If humanity is, and we've raised the stakes for ourselves by poisoning the biosphere and creating weapons that can annihilate all of us. If we are not going to annihilate ourselves, if we are going to survive and even become this thriving, great progress that we somehow imagine we could be, how are we going to change the way people relate with that kind of power so that it doesn't mess with them?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when you're given a degree of power, it can very easily be abused. You're a president, even a manager, head of a department, a CEO or whatever. Even being a teacher in a class, you've got a degree of power. But I've always believed that power is about representation. So you're there to represent, you're there to encourage participation. And if you can do that in such a way that you're there, but you're not actually there, power to me is something that people have, but it's about passing it on. It's like a flame. So it's the same with music. There's no point in someone saying, I'm the best, I'm this, I'm that. At the end of the day, there's a million people doing what you're doing. I don't care what genre it is. So there's always someone who's going to come out there and you're going to think, I've got the best voice in the world. And you're going to sing and you're going to have a phenomenal voice maybe, because there are a lot of phenomenal singers. But there's also someone, a next person half your age or who's just come out, who's going to be, oh, wow, that person's really good as well, But I meet musicians all the time who've got a degree of, they've got an overinflated ego. They hold themselves in extremely high esteem. And it's all a load of BS at the end of the day, because there's always going to be someone else. And my vision for music is like my vision for life. It's about empowerment. It's about passing on the flame. So that if you know something, there's no point I'm going to keep it to myself. That's the whole point of education, is to spread the word. And in spreading the word, you might open people's minds up a little bit to actually think, oh, I can do that too. Same with radio, Most people come to radio and think that we're doing some magic science, some weird voodoo with microphones. Anyone can do what we're doing. And if everyone understands that, and everyone should be doing radio. Radio shouldn't be owned by corporations. It's the people's medium, and it always has been. But what happened was somebody in the 1920s thought, well, if we do this and we do this, in other words, if I play the record 5 times, then it sells more at the shop. And if it sells more at the shop, they'll buy more sets to play the record on, because that was the era of the phonogram and everything. And the record companies got immensely tied in with radio. So it was a tautology, it's a circle. And that means you have to play commercial music on radio. And it doesn't always work like that, because we don't like one kind of music. So it's great for people to understand that power actually means you've got to be able to share it. It's not about, I'm going to control you for the rest of your life. Whether it's about a radio station playing the same songs, or whether it's a politician, or whether it's somebody saying to young people, right, you got to go into the army. We've still got conscription in Cyprus for young males. The psychological effect this has on people, the brainwashing, the fact that you're kidnapping kids for 2 years or 14 months now of their lives or whatever it is so anachronistic, because people get influenced. When power is so rigid, the more vulnerable people get influenced. I'm not saying everybody gets influenced, but the people that are more malleable, and this is how you get one nation fighting another, because people believe in the rubbish that they're told by their leaders.
We've got a couple of tracks of music now, and then we'll be back with more of my conversation with Haji Mike, talking about what's going on in the world. Interesting fellow, eh? We'd love to know what you think about what you're hearing. Leave a comment. We'd also love it if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Haji Mike has an album out called Haji Mike on the Mic, and this is Time to Unite. You're listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.
Peace and love and an end to the violence, north, east, west and south. Essere spozzes che mi appala si nandifican e psesti scala. Charlie, Kibreos, se che mi sambollemo, horistelos. Police were busy giving traffic tickets. Meantime my brother was getting a licking. I had to check it, I couldn't take it. Watching the match, I'm trying to fake it. Throw away your gun and throw away your knife. Check it now, people, it's time to unite. Throw away your gun and throw away your knife. Check it now, people, it's time to unite. Throw away the botsa, skip to gala. Prepina zisis dikos kafka. Throw away the botsa, skip to gala. Prepina zisis dikos kafka. Scared for banda and scarred for life. The dude went home to greet his wife. Ikaimeni syndromaktike. Keimana tu shokaristike. His friends stared whenever he passed. If only he thought I moved twice as fast. But time was short and he didn't. And if he was there again, he probably wouldn't. Throw away your gun and throw away your knife. Check it now, people, it's time to unite. Throw away the gun and throw away the knife. Check it now, people, it's time to unite. Throw away the boats and skip to gala. Prepina zisis likos kafka. Throw away the boats and skip to gala. Prepina zisis likos kafka. Emendora, udehtes din banda buishen kafkaes. Pudina hindu cosmo gestin historia. Polemus, hanemus, hasta stia. Tora travisamen macria. Sin disco figin, pub and bar. So we must learn to love and respect. Take heed, my brother, cause your head could be next. Throw away the gun and throw away the knife. Check it now, people, it's time to unite. Throw away the gun and throw away the knife. Check it now, people, it's time to unite. Throw away the boats and skip to gala. Prepina zisis dikos kafka. Throw away the boats and skip to gala. Prepina zisis dikos kafka. Time to unite. σκεφτούγαλα. Πρέπει να ζήσεις δίχως καυκά. Throw away the μπότσα σκεφτούγαλα. Πρέπει να ζήσεις δίχως καυκά. Throw away the gun and the trouble and the trouble and the trouble and the strife. Throw away the gun and the knife and the thing that'll ruin your life. Throw it away, save your life, live it today. Throw it away, save a life, live it today. Throw away your gun, throw away your knife. Checking out people, it's time to unite. See? Throw away your gun, throw away your knife. You checking out people, it's time to unite. See? Σκεφτούγαλα.
Haji Mike είσαι έτοιμος? Χρόνια και ζαμάνια γέμου.
Now this one special request to the Cyprus and Jamaica crew. The original. Daga, 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 daga. Yeah. C to the Y to the J to the A. C to the Y to the J to the A. C to the Y to the J to the A. C to the Y to the J to the A. Connect, connect, connect. Connect, connect, connect. Connect, connect, connect. Connect, connect, connect. Raka in Greek said that is a manga. In the Mugamni's warm super. Coming from Cyprus, big up Jamaica. Sweet land, blue mountain and water. Mediterranean, Caribbean sea. One people thing, one unity. Whole wide world under pressure. Stay positive and Jah will bless ya. Now this one is the original flavor. Watch this now, roll. We got more flavor than the Cyprus potato. C to the Y to the J to the A. C to the Y to the J to the A. C to the Y to the J to the A. C to the Y to the J to the A. Connect, connect, connect. Connect, connect, connect. Connect, connect, connect. Connect, connect, connect. We eat molasses, you eat callaloo. We have banana and mango too. You call it patty, we call it bureki. You got the yaki, we got halloumi. Rum and the black, zivania, scotch bonnet. Absolutely berry. Eat it with care or you become one big pusheki.
Harine μου τον δαλόκα μου έγινε λάχανο. Άντερε Μιχαήλη, κούρτες και το μπουζούκι σου.
C to the Y to the J to the A. C to the Y to the J to the A. C to the Y to the J to the A. C to the Y to the J to the A. Connect, connect, connect. Connect, connect, connect. Connect, connect, connect. Connect, connect, connect.
CY Jamaica, Miss Mike, come connect. Listen to me lyrics coming full of intellect. Fling it body with the reggae style check. Murdering this and we out of national respect. Hype on the shit, jump on the step. The Greek and Jamaican link up internet. These are made of threats, everything I said. Like a tagger, we attack a sound boy, come correct.
That Haji Mike featuring Med Dread with CY2JA Connect from the album 28. And before that, from Haji Mike on the mic, Time to Unite. All right, here's the next part of my conversation with Haji Mike. I think you just said something especially relevant right now. You use the word anachronistic. I think part of why people are in so much shock over the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is war in Europe. It had become unthinkable.
Listen, I don't buy that at all, right?
No? Okay.
We've had wars in Europe since the Second World War. This is in Europe. It was invaded in 1974 by Turkey.
I know, but on this scale.
Yeah, but it's the scale. It's the scale of what happened to our island. It's the same thing. 39% of Cyprus was taken over, which represented like 70% of the economy. Over 200,000 people, all Cypriots, were displaced. At the time, that was a third of the population. Well, the same thing's happening in Ukraine. The only difference is it's just bigger numbers. And that's why a lot of people don't realize that these things have been going on. In the recent history of Europe, there's always been wars. What was going on in the Balkans? All right, it wasn't in this century, but so what? I mean, big deal. It's still after the Second World War. I just think it in many people's eyes, it wasn't expected that this was going to happen. Maybe that's a better way of seeing it. But to sort of put it in the context of this is the first war in Europe since...
No, that's not what I meant, but I don't mean it's the first, because obviously these other things have happened. But this does feel like it's kind of a shock in a way.
This is scary because it involves what you said before. It's the nuclear button. But I'd like to think that all countries have balances and checks. One of the most frightening things about the election of Donald Trump was the nuclear button for me.
For me too.
All right, presidents are elected and presidents dethroned and presidents are re-elected or whatever. But I think it is scary, to think that Putin can do something like that. But I don't think it's just Putin that does it. There's a whole system in check. And there was a famous case. I can't remember the details, but there was a case in the 70s where the world nearly accidentally, due to a satellite malfunction, where the Russians nearly pressed the button. And when it came to that last person who was going to do the final twist of the key, that person was brave enough to say, no, I'm not doing this, despite the fact they'd been told by the Kremlin to do it.
Yeah, we had that happen under Reagan once here.
Those people are the real heroes, really, So I don't think it's as simple as that, but I think that is the thought, the fact that we could, in 15 to 30 minutes, both of us could be disintegrating, And that is a very universal thing, because this is war on a scale that we've never seen before.
But it is important to note that the aggressors, the big nation aggressors, they're all doing it. The United States has done as bad things. China is doing as bad things. So there is no good guy and bad guy. That's the mentality that people want, but it doesn't work that way. It's that we have to get back to that piece that you were talking about, which is the irrationality. We need to actually deal with our lives and our world without resorting to, if you go downtown and someone pisses you off, you don't just shoot them. In this country, that's happening more and more, honestly, but that's crazy.
Yeah, of course it is. And I think the point really is the fact that this isn't about taking sides. There's only one side in war, and that's the side of peace.
Right.
That's my opinion. A war shouldn't happen in the first place. And when we say things like that, people call us traitors, despite the fact that you might have suffered, you might have lost everything. I think the real humanity in things is to be able to stand up and understand that really what the world needs is peace. And the world has been at war for decades. Every 5-10 years, there's something going on. And we see it in the destruction of a country like Syria, for example. What was all that about? Oh, it's about regime change. It's the most ridiculous thing. I'm going to invade the country, interfere in the country because I don't like the regime. Well, the people elected that regime. Whether you agree with it or not is irrelevant. It's a bit like the United States suddenly saying, right, we're going to invade Cuba finally, because we want to change the regime. It's none of your business to change the regime. If the people in that country want to change the regime, they will. And that might happen. I don't know. And it might not happen. Who's got the right to determine it? Just because there's millions of people here and there's less people here, it's might override, and this is wrong. This is fundamentally wrong.
We'll be back with the final part of my conversation with Haji Mike, musician, DJ, educator, really interesting person. But here's a song from an album called RLY, ? This is the Highgate Rockers. This is a band that Haji Mike is part of. This is Peace and Love, Tranquility.
Pressure, too much pain, too many people suffering, wasting away. We got to live this life, humble and free. We got to live this life, tranquility, 'cause there's too much pressure, too much pain, too many people suffering again. That was then and this is now. Everything has changed and it all stays the same. It's the pressure and the pain of Babylon. The pressure and the pain of Babylon. Too much pressure, too much pain, too many people suffering, wasting away. We got to live this life, humble and free. We got to live this life in tranquility. The peace, the love, the unity, it's all we need in the community. The peace, the love, the unity, it's all we need in a community. We want peace and love. We want peace and love. Just peace and love. Some peace and love. Too much pressure, too much pain, too many people suffering, wasting away. We got to live this life, humble and free. We got to live this life in tranquility. Again, too much pressure, too much pain, too many people suffering, wasting away. We got to live this life, humble and free. We got to live this life in tranquility. You got to be humble. You got to be wise. You got to be able to distinguish between the truth and the lies. You got to be humble. You got to be free. You got to live your life with tranquility. Too much pressure, too much pain. Too many people suffering, wasting away. We got to live this life, humble and free. We got to live this life in tranquility. We got to live this life in tranquility. I said, we got to live this life in tranquility. We got to live this life in tranquility.
From the Highgate Rockers album RLY ? That's Peace and Love, Tranquility. And now here's the final part of my conversation with Haji Mike. Let's talk a little bit about Sharka.
Well, Sharka is a real labor of love that came about through an encounter of like-minded people. I would say mostly it was a virtual encounter, although a few months beforehand, I'd actually met Bernard physically. We was in this great event that happens in a place called Box, which is in Wiltshire, which is very near Real World Studios, in a pub called the Queen's Head, and it's called Sturm, and it usually happens, I think, in December. And it's a gathering of musicians from all over the world, and they get together for a week and they write songs. And so before the sort of first day of the workshop, you know, the activities, our common friend Rob Bozas, who works at Real World, said to me, "Bernard, this is Mike. Mike, this is Bernard. Right, I'm going to leave you two to it." We just, you know, hit it off straight away. We talked for quite a lot of hours. And then the next day, few days, I don't know what happened. I just found myself in the same room as Bernard all the time. You know? So you go to one room, there's a group of musicians, and Bernard was always in the room, and I was always in the room. The first room we was in, the first area sort of thing, we suddenly thought, nah, I don't like this. So we went into another room. And at the end of the week, you know, we'd built up this really good rapport, and we said we'd stay in touch. Shortly after that, you know, the real issue hits the fan with COVID, you know, and it's the first lockdown. And I'd been doing virtual production for quite a long time, from probably as far back as 2005, when it would take you hours to upload something and hours to download something. So we came up with this idea of working with Simon and Mouna, who at the time were based in Morocco. And it was a very interesting process. It was very different from a lot of the stuff that I'd done before. And I really like the multilinguality of Chaka Chouka. It's got a real power to it. The fact that you can hear English, Arabic, French. I think I put in a couple of Cypriot words as well somewhere in the dialect. And it just evolved into an album quite naturally, you know. It was a great experience, but the problem really was, okay, after a few months, we made this really great album and we released it, but without having the power to tour it, you know, due to COVID, like a lot of musicians have been so limited, you know, in the last 2 years. It's virtually impossible to make a living out of music. I'm fortunate enough to be a full-time academic, you know, but I think the vast majority of musicians in the world, I'm talking about the ordinary hard-working people, not the people who are celebrities who've got big stashes somewhere in a bank. Those people, the 99% of musicians, not the 1% who are famous, are the ones that really, they suffered tremendously in the last couple of years. So hopefully at some point we will meet. I've never met Simon and Mouna, I've met Bernard. We will meet and do some live shows, which I'm really looking forward to, and it will probably be in France because they're all based there and I'm the odd one now. So
that will be very special when you all get together.
I'm really lucky. You know, for me, it's one of the best things I've ever done. Music is a journey, and sometimes you don't know where you're going with it. When you start a project, obviously you have to sit down and think, right, well, what's the objective here? and you reason with the people that you're working with, and you come up with a plan. But I've never planned a career as such. I'm very reluctant with things like fame and everyone knowing me out here and stuff like that. I don't really want to be famous. I'm more inspired by what music can do for people rather than how much money I'm going to make out of this song and that song. I don't care. So it's just it's a great project, and I'm glad that I'm part of it. And you're lucky you didn't interview us all at the same time, because it's mayhem.
Haji Mike, thank you so much for being on the show and talking with me. It was really fun. We had quite a time getting ourselves scheduled because we're both pretty busy. So we ended up meeting at what was 1 a.m. for me and 10 a.m. for him. And we had a great conversation. It's always interesting to talk with someone who's really thinking about things and looking at things and has different experiences than I do and different perspectives. That's how we learn. So Haji Mike, really appreciate you being on the show and the work you're doing in the world and the music, both the serious and the fun. Folks, if you'd like to know more about Haji Mike, he has a website, of course. It's hajimike.com, HAJIMIKE.com. Check it out. There's a lot of cool stuff there, and I think you'll be interested to read more of his story. Thank you, Haji Mike. And if you enjoyed this episode of Paradigms, I hope you'll check out the 520 others in the archive at the Paradigms website, paradigms.life, and in iTunes and wherever else you find your podcasts. Many thanks to the folks who are supporting Paradigms through our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/paradigms. We really appreciate your support. It makes a lot of difference. It's been great bringing Haji Mike to you. We're going to close the show with one more track of music from Chaka Chouka's album Sharka. It's Peace Train. And let's let the word for the week be peace. We need peace on Earth. All right, Baruch signing off. For Paradigms, we'll be back next time with more inspiring people. Remember to check out our YouTube channel. We've got some really cool videos now of our episodes. All right, until next time, peace and be well.
Sounds of the treble and bass. The high sun scorches the place. Feeling the selectors, tunes they play. Slabs of vinyl, night and day. People's eyes speak joy and pain. We might get there together on the peace train.
Nos angoisses nous ont boité, nous ont mangé.
Are you coming or are you going? This could be the last trip. If you miss it, you'll regret and lose all the wonderful joy of the journey, where music overflows like a river to the sea in 1,000 native tongues, and everyone understands every single note and feeling.
Les guerres et la misère, les maladies invisibles nous rattrapent. Le monde est si fragile, protégeons-le pour nos enfants.
judged by the documents they don't have. Where freedom is not just a word, included, excluded. It's a passion everyone has. No uniforms, no guns, tanks, missiles. Partially armed with intent to destroy and kill and decimate your free will. Where children have a future to share creativity, love, peace, harmony. Where you can breathe freely as one entity, not judge or be judged or be begrudged, not kept down and constantly interrupted or corrupted via jokes for the few that victimize the many. Laugh out loud, everyone together. Laugh out loud, everyone together. On a journey, on a peace train. If you join me, we can go on a journey, on a peace train. If you join me, we can go on a journey, on a peace train. If you join me, we can go on a journey, on a peace train. Some people try to defend the undefendable. They cry crocodile tears over wasted years. Over wasted years.
You've been listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.